So today we're looking at trouble stocks, companies that are not going anywhere, and we're going to find out about the bull and the bear case for each of them. Fellow investors, bonjour. This is Mike Leroux, founder of Dividend Stocks Rocks and passionate investor. You're listening to the Dividend Guy blog podcast where I and my co-host Véronique will help you invest with more conviction so you can enjoy your retirement. Dividend Growth Investors, bonjour, Mike Leroux here. You're listening to the Dividend Guy podcast. I hope you are doing well. We have a full pack episode talking about like 6 companies today, Véronique? It's going to be crazy, right?
Yes, it's gonna be crazy. And I mean, been a long time, I think, that we did like an episode full of that many stocks. So it should be interesting. The way we did it is I made a small selection of companies that are a source of concern for many investors. Because every time we do a webinar, we get questions on them. So today we'll answer investors about them. And for each, you will share your bull and bear cases and maybe some more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to confuse you even more because I'm going to show you why you should hold on to those stocks and also why you should quit on them. And
Right.
and that is part of like the buy and sell struggle. Whenever you have a company that does not perform in your portfolio for like few months, sometime a year or two, then you start to wonder, should I keep it? Should I not keep it? But the thing is, you should not look at the stock price performance. And I always say, like, don't look at the short term. And then people get almost offended when I talk about like the past 5 years. But I'm like, what is 5 years when you invest for like 40 or 50 years in
Mhm.
throughout your entire investor's life? So yes, 5 years is not that long. And the important part at this point is more to either decide that you have the right conviction to invest in those companies or keep your holdings, or if you just determine, you know what, now it's enough. The bear case convinced me that it's time to let go. So we're going to go through all stocks with the exact same framework because there's one thing, it's impossible to know if I'm going to be right or wrong, or if any investors, when they look at their portfolio, if they're going to be right or wrong in the next 5 years. What you can
Mhm.
do, though, is to have a clear framework to use so you can make those moves with conviction. So maybe you're going to be wrong or right, but at least you're not going to suffer from paralysis by analysis.
So before we start, remember never to consider the stocks mentioned on this podcast as buy or sell recommendations. You must always do your complete due diligence. So let's start, Mike, with one quite popular with my family. My children walk with them, my husband runs with it, and we have shares of it in our portfolio. So Nike NKE is a consumer discretionary stock that doesn't need much introduction. Still, its price has been downtrend for a while, which worries investors. So, what is your bull case for Nike?
That one is a hard sell at one point, right? But still, there are a lot of things to love about Nike if you forget about the stock price. First, its playbook. I mean, it's like one of the largest sport apparel company in the world, selling iconic shoes such as like the Air Jordan. And I was actually fascinated when I listened to Nike's episode on acquired.com. They
Mm.
discussed how many billions they're selling in Air Jordans. It's just like crazy. That's a business by itself and it's a huge one. So, of course, Nike, iconic brand, lots of marketing, using a lot of athletes as influencers, definitely benefit from a lot of pricing power as well. And they are both in retail stores and offer direct to consumer purchases. In terms of growth vectors, well, they can count on growing their market share in emerging markets, especially in China, and also to grow their direct to consumer, which the major advantage I would say is higher margin. In terms of moat, we're really talking about no one can copy Nike. I mean, you
Mhm.
either want to have the swoosh on your t-shirt or on your shoes or you don't. And it's a brand that is recognized across the world.
Now, what is your bear case and does it explain why it lags in the market?
Yeah, so in English we say you cannot have your cake and eat it too. I still prefer the French version where it's something around you cannot have the butter and the cash that comes from the butter and the farmer's girl smile. It sounds a lot better in French, but anyway, I just wanted to say it. The problem with Nike is for several years they thought, oh, let's go online, let's focus on direct to consumer sales, and let's just ignore big retailer stores such as Foot Locker or Dick's Sporting Goods and the likes. So what
Mhm.
happened there is they kind of like broke their relationship with their biggest sellers. So yes, they were still there, but of course, I mean, all of those retailers were not super happy to see Nike focusing on selling directly to the consumer while they were losing sales in their stores. So that created a bad environment for them, coupled with a difficult economic environment on top of that. Of course, when you're thinking about Nike or any other, like, not luxury, but like high quality sports apparel, it's quite cyclical. It still falls into the discretionary spending for consumers.
Mhm.
And maybe they're going to just go for like a cheaper option. And I mean, for a lot of people, they're still running shoes, and a running shoe is a running shoe. So they're just going to buy something a little bit more accessible and just go on with it. Of course, the competition in this field is fierce. So we're talking about a lot of other brands such as Adidas, New Balance, Oka, and so on. So they're not alone in that field. It's hard to gain market shares. And when the economy slow down, well, then you're having a little bit more problem. So they're coming up with a new plan. They have a new CEO. And the goal is really to get those relationships with retailers a little bit on board, trying to become the sports apparel favorite again. I don't think there is like no more hopes left for Nike. I mean, they still have that great brand. They still have like their distribution network and so on. So I'm still confident that they can turn things around, but it's of course going to be a long path at this point. It's going to test investors' patience. So if you are the type of person that cannot stand 3, 4 bad quarters in a row, I mean, you probably have thrown the towel for Nike already. But it's a matter of like giving them time to
Mhm.
see if they can apply their new plan and if their plan is going to actually work out or not.
All right, and Mike, I just want to add a parenthesis because I think maybe some listeners will love it. I'll say that expression in French because if you come to Quebec, guys, you can use it. Okay, it is. Non, tu ne peux pas avoir le beurre et l'argent du beurre. And I've said it with my like Quebec French accent, so there you go. Tu ne peux pas avoir le beurre et l'argent du beurre. All right,
Yeah.
Mike, another consumer discretionary stock on our list today is Canadian Tire, ctc.a.to, another store that I like. The Canadian store provides customers with exclusive brands and is known for being recession resistant. So, what else would make your bull case?
It's kind of ironic. I did not realize, but after those two companies, it sounds like this episode has been sponsored by your husband. I mean, so because Max just
Indeed.
loves to shop at Can Tires. So, anyways, that was just like having a little bit of fun here in the show. So, Canadian Tire Playbook, well diversified retail business, well established brands such as Canadian Tire, Sport Check, Marks. It is definitely a Canadian iconic brand. They also sell a lot of like their own home brands, so like MotoMasters, Mastercraft, that improve their margin. They definitely offer everything in those stores, and there's always something at discount. So
Mhm.
it's a good way to attract customers and always make sure that you have a lot of like foot traffic coming to your stores. In terms of growth vectors, well, with all the tariff saga going on, I'm guessing that we're going to have a wave of Buy Canadian that could help them. But in general, they focus on the growth of population and also on e-commerce. I mean, they're already everywhere in Canada, so it's a little bit hard to grow
Mhm.
faster in that sense. But definitely, population and e-commerce are great ways to grow. They benefit from a strong distribution network, so they use their stores as hubs also for the e-commerce. So you can buy online and then pick up at the store. They have like a dedicated space now, so you don't even have to go see a cashier or anybody else. You just go in, you key in your code, you get your stuff, and then you leave. So very good way to do it, similar to what Walmart is doing it on the US side
Mhm.
as well. And finally, Kintyre, of course, on top of like benefiting from a strong brand recognition, they also have loyalty programs. So it's kind of like the classic playbook for a classic retailer, but it's been working well so far.
However, Canadian Tire has not given much to investors regarding stock price appreciation. What's your bear case, Mike?
So Kintyre stock is highly volatile. It goes up, it goes down all the time. I remember at one point I have like a very small portion in my Smith Manaver portfolio. It was down like 25%, and then it went back up and allow it's probably up like maybe like 5% right now in my portfolio. So if you're looking for something slow and steady, definitely not the right place. In terms of business flaws, of course, we have a retailer. So we're thinking about inventory that has to be managed. The e-commerce is great, but sometimes it only cannibalizes the in-store sales. You're selling more on e-commerce, but you're going to sell less in your stores. So in the end, it's pretty much the same thing. Of course, among the threats, we're going to talk about the economic cycles. In Canada, unfortunately, we were the first country to drop our interest rates and the country in among the G7 that cut their rates the largest in 2024. So definitely not a sign that the Canadian economy is doing well. With the tariffs, probably not going to get better on that side. So definitely Kintyre, yes, will be able to have this base revenue coming from all like regular and household products, but with like the products that are more discretionary expenses and that comes with higher margin, it's going to be a lot tougher. Finally, the competition is crazy in this field. Canadian Tire has to fight against Costco, Walmart, Home Depot, Rona, pretty much everything. The fact that they sell a little bit of everything, they have to face a lot of American competition, which makes it very hard on the margins and also on growth potential moving forward.
Okay, so in the same sector, we can find Starbucks. Again, it's a well known brand, but it's giving investors headaches. What's your bull case for it?
This one, more than 30,000 stores across the world, coming with a very strong loyalty program. Their playbook is relatively simple in the sense that they are selling not just high quality coffee, but also kind of like complex coffee where you can literally ask anything and like a crazy
Mhm.
combination of like 12 different syrups, and they're going to make it for you. So it comes with an experience, but it also comes with that complexity that you cannot have to other competitors. Like if you run into a Tim Horton, don't try to ask them like a caramel macchiato with a sip of cinnamon on it. They're gonna
Mhm.
just look at you just like, what are you talking about, guy? So it is definitely something interesting for them. Their main growth vector, because they have like such a strong position in North America, their main growth vector is still in China. They're opening about 400, 500, 600 new stores per year. So a lot of growth that should be coming from there. In terms of moat, well, they benefit from an iconic brand, of course, a lot of pricing power, distribution network, and finally now they're coming up with an interesting plan to go back to Starbucks. So that the plan is back to Starbucks. They run into a lot of challenges. We're going to talk about them in the bear case in a second. But the new CEO is coming with a new plan, trying to go back to Starbucks roots, what made them so successful. And hopefully it's going to work out. So far, the market loves how the plan is being developed. Yeah, it's great to see the stock price going back up, but we're not over yet.
Listeners, let's empower you in the investment world with our free dividend rockstar list, which includes stock ideas with positive dividend triangles. How does the list help investors, Mike?
You know, Vero, we survey regularly our members and our readers, and we ask them what are their biggest struggle. And one that keeps coming back is really the buy struggle. Most investors don't know what to buy, they don't know when to buy it, and the Rockstar list will help them grow a little bit more their conviction because that list of stock will just include companies that show great financial metrics. Of course, you cannot start by picking them blindly, but it's a pretty good start to make sure that the company that you're about to read and know their business model is actually a business showing revenue growth, earnings growth, and dividend growth. The way I use it usually is I will filter it by sector to identify a sector that I want to have more exposure to, and then I just look for companies that have the strongest dividend growth model.
To download the list, enter your name and email at thedividendguyblog.com/rockstar. Again, hit pause now and go to thedividendguyblog.com/rockstar. And Mike, you hold shares of Starbucks, so what is your bear case for it?
Yeah, so it has been a rocky ride. I've been a shareholder since 2017, and ironically, a year after I was holding the shares, my investment was down double digit. And it was like the narrative was quite negative around Starbucks back in 2018. Things have changed for the best and for the worst at the same time all over the place. So it's kind of like a hard stock to monitor and to follow. So depending on every 6 months, there's a shift in the narrative. So I would say to shareholders, do not desperate. Probably that there's going to be another story coming up and it's going to be better. Right now, the back to Starbucks narrative sounds to be quite interesting. We'll have to see how this develops. The major business flaw that we have right now for Starbucks is, I would say, the US market saturation. I mean, there are like Starbucks everywhere. So at one point, it's hard to grow. So you have to focus on comparable sales. So trying to sell more or at a higher price to the same clients, not always easy. There are also a lot of Starbucks stores in shopping malls where we see a declining in foot traffic. So, of course, if you have less customers going to the shopping malls, you're going to have less customers buying coffee at the same time. So that is another problem. They went through several labor disputes over the past few years. One of them is kind of ironic, but the fact that they offered those super complex coffee that customers can decide from an infinite list makes it very hard for baristas to make them quickly, and therefore workers' conditions are not optimal in that regard. So that comes with a lot of problems. And finally, while they expect to grow in China, they face a lot of competition over there. Luckin Coffee is back. There was like a phase where it seemed that Luckin Coffee would take over China completely, but after that we had like a fraud problem over there. The company almost disappeared. Now it's on a strong comeback, and the market in China is a lot tougher due to the economic slowdown as well. So if it's tough to grow in China, and I remember like one of my friends a while ago used to call Starbucks a $5 coffee instead. Well, now it's probably $10 coffee that we have to call it. So of course, similar to what we have discussed with Kintyre and Nike so far, a little bit more on the discretionary side or the luxury side, where a lot of people might just want to brew their coffee at home or select a cheaper option instead of paying such a high price for a Starbucks coffee. And speaking of competition, well, on top of Luckin Coffee in China, we definitely have restaurant brand, including Tim Horton, that is attacking the coffee markets for a while. McDonald's is also going after that market too. So we have plenty of competitors. And of course, when you are a premium product selling, of course, at a premium price, while when the economy slows down, it's going to be tougher for you to maintain the same volume, and with less volume comes smaller margin and less profit. So it's a tough place to be for Starbucks, but they have a plan. They're working on it. We see some improvement already, so it's going to be interesting how 25 and 26 will develop for them.
And Mike, I don't know if they're doing the same in United States, but I've noticed that A&W is also trying to enter the market coffee. They now offer like lattes and cappuccinos and all that stuff, and they say that
Really? I did not even notice that.
and
That's
their
crazy.
coffee is organic. So anyway, not sure how it translates into sales. I didn't look at that, but I just thought it'd be fun to mention.
Just more competitors. Yeah, good
Yeah.
news. Good news.
So, Mike, it's starting to look like a sector challenge here. So, how do investors ensure that their investment thesis are still correct?
Well, there's a lot of gray areas, of course, especially when you look at your holdings and you see a stock that is not necessarily going down by like 50%, but not generating much growth. And when you look at the past 3 and 5 years in the stock market, anything that is not up 30% at least, it's kind of like a loser, mostly because the market has been up so high. So I would say first, if you want to make sure that your investment thesis is correct, the first thing is to be patient. Patience is the key. There's another problem because there's a difference between being patient and being complacent and just like, hey, everything's going to be all right and just tell your story that it's a fairy tale and everything's going to be fine. So holding losers is not a good option either. So my framework here is really to look at the reasons why I like a stock. So right, for example, I've highlighted a lot of like bull cases for those three companies so far, but then it's important to look at the numbers. And when I say numbers, I'm talking about like you go back on the financial statement, you look at, for example, the dividend triangle, so the revenue, the earnings, and the dividend growth trend over the past 3 and 5 years. You see if those numbers are making sense or not. Of course, if you look at the dividend triangle for the three companies that we have mentioned so far, Nike, Canadian Tire, and Starbucks, the revenue and earnings have slowed down. That is a fact. That is definitely a red flag telling you, yeah, there is something wrong. There's a problem happening with the stock. However, they are all related to the consumer discretionary sector. When there is an economic slowdown, when consumers feel trapped, maybe with inflation and higher interest rate, I don't know, I'm just throwing out ideas here. But because of what just happened over the past few years, it's just normal and expected that the consumer is spending a little bit less. And of course, you're going to cut on that brand new pair of shoes. You're not going to buy a lot of things at Canadian Tire, and you're probably going to brew your coffee at home. So that kind of makes sense that there is a slowdown. Now here comes the patience. The trick that I use for any of my holdings when I see that there's a dividend triangle that is slowing down, but the thesis is still good. Let's say I still believe that this company is doing well, is going to do well in the future, but the numbers are not backing my story, is I will determine a certain amount of years that I'm willing to be patient. When I say number of years, it's usually between 1 to 3 years, depending on my level of conviction and depending on the situation. So of course, it's not like a hard rule, it's more like a guideline. But then what is really important is just to determine a time frame. Because you cannot just say, oh, it's going to be better. And then 10 years later, you still hold a loser in your company, in your portfolio, and you have done nothing. That is like not a valid time frame. And then during that time frame, so let's say I have Starbucks in my portfolio and I'm willing to wait at least a good 2 years on this one, that's not a problem. But what I want to see during those 2 years is I want to see management come up with a plan, which this is exactly what's happening with Starbucks right now. Same thing with Nike. They're coming up with a plan. Doesn't mean that the plan is going to work, but at least you know what to look for. They are taking initiatives, and then each quarter you'll be in a better position now that you know what the plan is about to look about. So for example, like Starbucks decided to simplify its menu. So that will actually help with labor and will actually also simplify and probably improve margin going forward. So what you want to see after that is every quarter, well, you expect better comparable sales. You expect to have a little bit like growth, not necessarily year over year, but it could be sequential growth. So from last quarter to this quarter, just to see that there's some kind of like momentum or something happening. Of course, if I'm willing to wait 2-3 years with Starbucks, but every quarter that I review the company in 25, comparable sales keeps on slowing down. The new menu doesn't work. People are leaving. Well, maybe I'm not going to wait for 2-3 years. If everything keeps on going worse and worse, I'll probably revise my time frame and be a little bit faster on say, you know what? There was a problem. There was a solution. Unfortunately, the solution doesn't work. So this is how I can determine if I should keep a stock or not. And of course, if I see a company that is slowing down its dividend growth policy throughout this period, it's going to also send me another signal that probably they're not that confident about solving this problem with the existing solution. So it's really about having a time frame, looking for a plan, and then looking for metrics that would actually confirm or not that the plan is working.
And this is exactly how we built the Dividend Rockstar list, right?
Yeah, so when I'm looking for a potential replacement, I like to start by looking for companies with robust financial metrics. So instead of trying to go with ideas and narrative or a sexy sector or an industry and going for a trend, I just used a good old and boring stock screener and I apply a simple filter. I look for companies with revenue, earnings, and dividend growth over the past 5 years. And this is how we have built the Rockstar list. And the second step is then I'm going to filter by sector because there are some sectors I'm not interested in, Some sectors I'm already like overweight or fully invested. There's no point for me to add another tech stock in my portfolio. So I'm going to look elsewhere. So then I can narrow down my research quite fast. And then it's the time to dig into each company's business model and draft this investment thesis, read about the story, and making sure that you're building a compelling narrative around a company that already show robust financial metrics. Especially right now, there are so much uncertainties in this investment world. You want to make sure that you're not taking stupid bets, but rather making sound investment decisions. And that always starts with some key numbers.
And we update the Dividend Rockstar list monthly, so you can download the most recent one at thedividendguyblog.com/rockstar. Let's move to a frustrating holding for you and I, Mike. Granite REIT, grt.un.to. What bull case made it worthy of your portfolio?
Yeah, frustrating is a small word. We're going to get there in a second. But let's talk about the positives first. Granite, high quality industrial properties, mostly focused on logistics, distribution warehouses, and e commerce. So, definitely the right type of business at the right time. A lot of growth vectors around acquisition, and there's obviously a strong demand for those type of properties. So Granite is definitely at the right place. In terms of moat, I like their geographic presence. So they're present across the world, which makes them a little bit more diversified. They have an average of like a 5-year contract with each of their tenants. They have high quality tenants as well, a high occupancy rate that is always above 90%. So a lot of great things for Granite. The funds from operation keeps on growing. The FFO per unit is also growing. And of course, it's a rare dividend grower among REITs. It's been more than 10 years with consecutive dividend increases for this one. So there are a lot of things to love about this one besides the stock price performance.
How would you explain that? What's the bear case?
Yeah, that's not great. Well, first things first, and that has been a major business flaw. It's their dependence to Magna International. For the story, Granite is actually the spin-off of all Magna's international properties. That was spin-off, I think it was like 13 years ago, something like that. I mean, time flies. It's more than 10 years, that's for sure. But the problem is, even though management is well aware about this business flaw, and they diversify and improve that diversification year after year, we're still talking about 26 or 27% of their revenue coming from a single tenant. Now you're thinking, well, Magna Internationals are making auto parts. Auto parts will likely be subject to tariffs over tariffs, and it's just an ongoing story now, and it's going to be quite interesting to see how it develops. So we're not going to go deep inside the tariffs, because even though like we talk about it in an hour after you listen to this, probably another news is going to come up. So I'd rather skip that part. But long story short, it's never a good thing to be dependent on one tenant for a quarter of your revenue, a little bit more than a quarter of your revenue. It's even less of a good idea when that tenant, even though has a robust balance sheet, still it operates in a highly volatile environment subject to tariffs. Not great. On top of that, of course, we have the classic economic cycle with interest charges that are growing as Granite depends a lot on remortgaging their properties and leveraging those properties to grow by acquisition and build new development. Well, of course, interest charges will grow accordingly. So there's always that line where, are you able to grow your funds from operation enough to ensure that you will pay those higher interest charges? So that's also a problem. In terms of competition, we do have other REITs like Dream Industrial and Stag, but most industrial REITs, or REITs in general, it has been a sector thing. That sector is just not getting much love since interest rates rose in 21 and 22. Since then, it has been a very tough ride for most of them, depending, like regardless of which industries you're in. But I believe that the biggest problem here is definitely the dependence on Magna. So far so good, but that could have a catastrophic impact if Magna International does not renew their leases.
So, in the consumer staples sector, PepsiCo is a dividend king that dominates the salty snack market with a 60% market share. So, what else is in your bull case?
So for Pepsi, the playbook is relatively simple. I mean, they're selling plenty of snacks, plenty of beverages. They have iconic brands such as Pepsi, Lay's, Quaker Oats, Tropicana, and of course, my favorite, Doritos. They expect to keep on growing through heavy marketing and ironically research and development to develop new products. They focus on repetitive purchases, so you get that habit of like buying these nice treats and like a bag of chips or you're drinking like Gatorades at sports events and stuff like that. They have been able to increase their prices a lot to compensate for inflation. That worked for a while. Right now it's a little bit tougher and it's kind of like we feel that the win is changing a little bit more.
Mhm.
So yes, they still benefit from iconic brands. They still have a lot of pricing power. Their distribution network is quite impressive. So that opens the door for more acquisitions that are easy to integrate in their business model, and then they can easily distribute their products across several countries kind of like overnight. So they really are well positioned, but they are facing a lot of headwinds.
Hey, dividend growth investors, this is Vero. Mike is currently taking a sip of water, which gives us 10 seconds, and I literally mean 10 seconds to grow the podcast together. Go on Spotify or Apple Podcast, hit pause, and then under our logo, you'll see two very interesting buttons. One to subscribe, hit that subscribe button now, and then give us a 5-star rating. Our goal is to help more investors just like you. So please spread the love. Thank you. So, Mike, investors, like you said, tend to worry about it. So, what is your bear case for PEP?
Well, the main narrative here, unfortunately, it's like there's success that comes with a business flaw. A lot of consumers are looking for healthier choices. So that's a problem. And it's kind of funny because before we started recording, you told me that when you went to a Abs game and you were trying to eat healthy, and that was quite a challenge, really almost impossible. So it's kind of like the same thing. You're trying to eat healthy or drink something that is good for your health, and you want to buy PepsiCo products. Well, might as well just not eat at all or not drink at all. So it's going to be a tough
Mhm.
thing. Inflation hurt a lot on both sides. So, of course, they rose their price, but at one point, consumers are just like, you know what? It's just too much for us. We just stopped buying it. We had a very like bad story at the beginning of 2024 when Carrefour, one of the largest grocery stores in Europe, said, you know what? You went too far with your price increase, so we're going to take all your products off the shelves. That was more like a negotiation trick than anything else. It lasted 4 months, but just to show how a lot of consumers and a lot of merchants are not super happy about
Mhm.
this strategy. So yes, it worked for a while and they were able to improve their profit, but now they're getting slapped by the fact that people are done with this. Of course, there are lots of competition there, just thinking about Coca-Cola and Nestle, but also companies like Hershey going up after salty snacks. So this industry is pretty much crowded. Everybody's fighting for the same shelf space. I mean, the company is not going to go anywhere anytime soon, but it's going to be hard to post like high single digit growth, for example. So maybe low single
Right.
digit, that's one thing. Is it going to be a super growth company for a while? They will have to revise their marketing strategy, go back on their drawing boards, come up with a very solid plan. I'm not personally worried about this kind of business though, because that's been around and it's kind of like follow economic cycles. But in the meantime, we'll definitely test investors' patience.
Maybe they're gonna go back and hire Britney Spears again. I'm
That's
just
a good
kidding.
one.
All right, so let's end with Stella Jones, SJ.TO, a material stock. What's your bull case?
Yeah, I was super excited to add Stella Jones about a little bit more than a year ago to my portfolio, mostly because Stella Jones is a rare company in the materials sector that is not that dependent on commodity prices. Their playbook is they sell essential infrastructure products such as railway ties and utility poles. So even if price of wood goes up or down, well, all their clients will need to continue buy railway ties and utility poles, which is great. I mean, it's critical for transportation sector. It's critical for the energy sector as well. So that is like their kind of like their main moat there. They benefit also from long-term contract with those utility and railroad companies. They benefit from some additional pricing power due to their niche. It's really hard to find other competitors in this space. There are some, but it's a little bit tougher. And Stella-Jones is not only able to grow based on a continuous demand from the infrastructure products, but also from acquisition. So they are active both on both sides of the borders in Canada and in the US, and they benefit from manufacturers on both sides as well. So they're a little bit more protected against tariffs, so they can just
Mhm.
move production from one country to another to avoid tariffs on on the products that they're building. So that could be a good advantage for them as well.
But when we say material, we also say volatility. So is that the central aspect of your bear case?
Actually, it is not, even though it will have an impact, especially because they also sell residential lumbers for construction, stuff like that. So that part is still at risk. The tariff, as I said, will probably force Stella-Jones to restructure where they manufacture their utility poles and railway ties to ensure that they avoid tariffs as much as possible. But the biggest bear case and kind of like it was a double whack back in November when they reported their earnings and the stock price fell. They reported the morning when Trump won the election. So already there was a source of uncertainties. And on top of that, their guidance for 2025 were not that great, but mostly driven by an economic slowdown. So, of course, again, if we expect the economy to slow down, it means less spending in infrastructure, like big projects around utilities and railroads may not be that great. So they're going to check a little bit more their budget, probably slow down into their orders. So that's also a problem. And of course, if like commodity price goes up through the roof, there's another substitution because you can see utility poles and railway ties being made by in concrete as well. So there are like a few competitors there, but also some substitutions that Stella-Jones can face. So as you can
Mm.
see, even though that company has been around for ages, has been a very strong and steady dividend grower as well, grow by acquisition, and a very specific industry. Nothing is perfect.
So, Mike, from the list we shared today, are there any stocks investors are wasting time with? And which ones would you buy?
I'm still a big fan of Stella-Jones for the long run, so that would be probably one of my favorite one to buy today. I hold shares of Starbucks and Granite from this list. I like Starbucks playbook. Of course, it helps a little bit because I've bought it a while ago and I'm still up like by I think probably like 70 or 80%, so that's great. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to sit on that. I'm going to continue to monitor. This is a good example of a company that I have to monitor quarterly to see where the company is going. As for
Mhm.
Granite, all the metrics are good. So yes, the stock price is not going anywhere, but as long as the metrics are good, I don't mind. I'm not going to assess and give a value to a stock just based on short-term price fluctuation. And yes, short-term includes 1 to 5 years. Like for me, I mean, I'm in my 40s. I expect to invest again until I'm 80 or 90. So I still have like 40 to 50 years of investing. I've been investing for 20 years already. So definitely 5 years out of like 60 to 70 years, it's nothing. So yes, it sucks at this point, but if the metrics are good, I'm going to hold on to it. It's going to be a bit tougher for Canadian Tire, I think, because of the economy slowdown. But again, it's super hard to predict the future because on the one side, I don't expect a great year for the Canadian economy, and maybe we're going to finally have the recession I'm predicting for the past 3 years. I'm laughing about that because just to show you how difficult it is to forecast the future, and maybe on the
Right.
other side, we're going to have such a huge wave of buy Canadian that Canadian Tire will actually benefit from the situation. So again, future is cloudy at best. So you just look into your crystal balls and you don't see much. Well, that's normal. As for Pepsi, Starbucks, and Nike, it's very interesting because those three companies are not in the same industry, but they will react about the same way in terms of like they're all facing the same problem where consumers are buying less of their products. They have to
Mhm.
come up with a plan. They are coming up with a plan, And now it's really a story to see how those plans, all those solutions are going to play out. So again, it's a matter of like reading the financial statements every quarter, listening to what the CEO has to say. When you look at your portfolio, maybe you have like 20, 30, 40 stocks. If you have more than that, it's going to be very difficult for you to do this. But I like to monitor my companies like quarterly. And of course, I'm going to spend a lot less time tracking what's going on with a company like Microsoft or National Bank, and a little bit more time about Granite and Starbucks in my portfolio. If I had Pepsi and Nike, I would do the same. But those are three amazing companies with great iconic brands. So I am fairly confident that they're going to find a way to actually get out of this mess and go back into growth mode, mostly because they have a lot of tools in their box that they can use, and they are not done using those. So it's not game over yet. Far from it. We're just another challenge. They went through a lot of them in the past, so I'm not that worried about those either.
Well, thank you, Mike, for sharing your thoughts on these companies. Listeners, remember, stock price is not a reason to buy or to sell. Make sure your thesis matches the numbers, and you should be good to go at least until the next quarter. For more stock ideas showing a solid business model and investment thesis, download the Dividend Rockstar list at thedividendguyblog.com/rockstar. For the show notes and related content, visit thedividendguyblog.com/217. Next week, we'll discuss the role of each sector. Hit subscribe now so as not to miss it. And until then, stay invested.
Stay invested.
Hey fellow investors, it's Mike here. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Please note that the Dividend Guy Blog podcast is at no time issuing buy or sell recommendation. Please do your own due diligence, as this podcast is recorded for information and hopefully fun purposes only. Make your research, make sure you do your stuff. We're not responsible for your losses or your profit after listening to this episode. And until next one, stay invested.